Okay, y'all, so here we'll start with the beginning of my cancer story. Um, in 2013, I noticed that my nose was itching like constantly, all the time. And it was bothersome, but not really worrisome. Then I noticed that the whole left side of my face would start going numb. So in September of 2013 was the first time I saw any doctor. I noticed that there was a sore on the inside of my nose, and I was concerned that it was staph. If you don't know, everybody has staph in their nose. It naturally lives there. So I went to the first doctor, and he said that it was an infected hair follicle. Treatment was a nasal spray, a steroid, and I think an antibiotic. Um, anyway, so I kind of forgot about it. The nose spray didn't work. The steroid didn't work. It was still, the sore was still there. It was still bothersome. But our youngest son was getting a feeding tube, so naturally that kind of sucked up all the air in the room. So then in January of 2014, I just completely bypassed family practice, and I went to an ear, nose, and throat doctor. I started seeing him. I saw him every week for a couple of months. We tried putting cream on it. He said it wasn't an infected hair follicle. He thought it was an infection. He said he could see a scratch on the inside of my left nostril. By then, I had a bump that was forming in here. It was extremely painful. Anytime my nose was touched, it was very, very itchy. The very tip of my nose would itch really badly. So we began treatment. We tried about 6 different antibiotics. We tried combining the antibiotics. We tried with the cream. We tried without the cream. So in April, mid to late April, he referred me to a head and neck specialist in Dallas. So I went to this head and neck specialist. They wanted to do a culture. So they did a culture, and it came back all normal bacteria, which meant that there was no infection. The only bacteria that was in my nose was what is in everyone's nose. So at that point, the decision was made that we needed to do a biopsy. The biopsies on your nose have to be done under sedation because it's extremely painful. So a week went by, I heard nothing. Another week went by, and finally I called them, and they said that they would have to have the doctor call me back. So about probably 5 o'clock in the evening, I waited all day to take a shower waiting on this doctor to call. So of course, I get in the shower, get soap in my hair, and that's when he calls. So I'm standing in my bathroom, soaking wet, stark naked, and he tells me that the reason we're having so much trouble with it is because it's cancer. I was devastated. I was petrified. I was 37 years old, and I had cancer in my face. The decision was made to try surgery to remove it. So we did the first surgery in May, and they did something akin to what's called a Mohs surgery, M-O-H-S, if you Google it. It's where they take very, very thin layers and they freeze them so they can check for the perimeters to check and see if they've cut all the cancer away. So I did that surgery. They ended up, so this is how the doctor explained it to me. Your nose has 3 layers of tissue, like a sandwich. Okay, so the outer layer and the very inner layer are like the bread. And then you have the middle layer, which would, be like the meat and cheese, and it's kind of cartilage. It's a little firmer. So they took the inner 2 layers from my nose, about a quarter size, right here. I had a big plastic thing in there for, I think, about a week. When I went back to the doctor, his tone was very flat. He spoke very, very slowly, which is pretty terrifying. And he told me that it was much worse than they initially thought it was. So he recommended radiation. Give radiation a Google. see what it can do. They do radiation to your face. It can cause a lot of permanent damage, quality of life changing damages. So I went to a radiation oncologist and spoke with him. He did put the camera in my nose and kind of looked at things. He hadn't spoken with the head and neck specialist yet. So he told me to wait and let him speak with the head and neck specialist, and then he would get back to me. So my husband and I went and had something to eat, and he called me, and his tone was different. It was very flat. He was speaking very slowly, and he said that he didn't realize how bad it was till he got the report from pathology. So he recommended radiation. I didn't want radiation. I asked them about just removing it to get the cancer out. I had a special needs child. I didn't have time to play with it. I needed it gone. The doctor told me, "You're a young, attractive woman. We don't want to permanently disfigure you." My reply to him was, "I appreciate that, but what good is pretty if I'm dead?" So I would rather, take care of cancer and kill cancer and save my life, and, rather than be pretty. So I was sitting at home. I saw the commercial for Cancer Treatment Centers of America. I gave them a call to get another opinion. I went to Chicago. Their recommendation was another surgery to further remove, because there was so much cancer still left. So I went into that surgery, and if you look on my TikTok, there's a video that's a lot of pictures, and in one of them my nose is kind of curled up on this side, and it's where she took a lot of the tissue. I went into that surgery not knowing if I would come out still having a nose. They couldn't tell me what to expect. They didn't, they couldn't know until they actually got into surgery. So it was very, the whole thing was very, very emotional. Just the unknown, the uncertainty of it. So she did that surgery. She came out of surgery and told me, "You are absolutely going to have radiation. The cancer has started going into the bone up here. It was putting pressure on this nerve in here. So what they wanted to radiate was all of this nerve going behind my left eye. They wanted to radiate this whole area. So I finally consigned myself over to having radiation and, got myself all mentally prepared for it. I go to see their radiation oncologist, and he tells me that he wants me to get another opinion. And I just fell apart in the man's office. I couldn't help it. And I told him, you guys are like my third opinion on this. And I said, I really feel like this is where the Lord sent me for treatment. And he said, "Well, I really feel like the Lord is telling me and putting on my heart to tell you, get another opinion. The radiation will cause quality of life changing side effects. I could have ended up with a feeding tube because it was so close to my salivary glands. Radiation can kill your salivary glands, and you can't eat. So I'd have to have a feeding tube. To radiate the nerve behind my eye put a risk to my eyesight in my left eye. Radiating that close to my brain also put a risk to brain damage. It's very scary stuff. So I take his advice and I start calling MD Anderson in Houston. I finally got into MD Anderson. They did a surgical biopsy, and the consensus was I absolutely needed radiation to be cancer-free, but I had missed my window of opportunity. You have 6 to 8 weeks after surgery for the radiation to actually have any effect. So I made the decision to have my nose completely removed. At the time, there was not, I guess, technically cancer present. The cells were not cancerous, but cells that had been completely healthy 2 months before were into severe dysplasia. So cells run on a scale. you have healthy cells, and then you have cancerous cells. And as the cells start to degrade and change, it's called dysplasia. It's a breakdown of the cells. So I made the decision. Just, it wasn't a matter of if we could ever call it cancer, it was when. So I told him, just take it. So a few months go by until I have the surgery, and it by this time it's November. It's right before Thanksgiving. I get to Houston, and she's going over all of the pre-op stuff, and she goes, so there's not actually cancer present at this time. And again, I lost it. So many tears through that journey. It was one of the hardest times of my life. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. The hardest decision I've ever made. She went over everything again, and I'm a very logical thinking person. So we didn't know if I would have a sense of smell. They couldn't tell me what to expect. We didn't know if I'd have a sense of smell. We didn't know if I would be able to taste. So my husband took me out to a Japanese steakhouse. So if I would never be able to taste again, the last thing I tasted was something I love. And I think that's enough for now.